Welcome back to In the News. I'm your hostess with the mostest, Nick Knappenberger. Our topic this week is going to be local elections, and I know, when I said that, the first thing that came to your mind was these poorly made local election ads like this one.
When it comes to education, government bureaucracy is like a cosmic bully. Legislation like No Child Left Behind is targeting and destroying our ability to best teach our children.
I believe in more local control over our own schools because I have more than enough faith in the parents and teachers of Rockingham County. I'm also a fiscal conservative and a supporter of athletics and the arts. Let's work together to defend a bright and shining future for the children of Rockingham County.
Elect Christopher Knight.
But the thing is, local elections and politics are actually much more important in your day-to-day life than you may think. They affect you a lot more than most federal policies even do. Things like policing, the level of education where you live, and even how safe your water is to drink. Today, my guest is Nick Smaligo. He recently finished up an election run for the city council in Carbondale, Illinois. Even though he didn't win his election, he still has a lot to say about the importance of local politics and gives a little more of an insight into how local elections are covered and how they ought to be covered. Hope you guys enjoy. Welcome back, guys. This week, my guest is Nick Smaligo. Is that how am I pronouncing that right? I've only heard it.
Smaligo.
What was that again?
Smaligo.
Smaligo. Okay, thank you. I've only seen it written. I've never heard it said out loud.
Yeah.
So Nick, you actually just finished up an election cycle running for Carbondale, Illinois. You were running for city council, is that
That's
correct?
right, yeah.
Awesome. And was that your first foray into local politics, or any politics really, I guess?
It was my first attempt to run for office, yeah. But I've been involved as an activist and as a kind of gadfly in the local political scene for a while, I guess.
Well, that's awesome. Real quick, can you just give me a quick elevator pitch of your background in politics and maybe a little bit how you got into it if you want to?
Sure, yeah. Well, like I said, I've been an activist in Carbondale for about a decade, and was involved in various community organizing efforts, both around environmental issues and around issues related to mass incarceration. And about 2 years ago, I co-founded a project with a number of other people across town called the Carbondale Spring. This involved a kind of citizen or resident research of the city budget, in which we noticed that Carbondale was overspending and had a relatively large police force for a city of its size. And we used that as a kind of attempt to put forward a vision of the kind of town that we wanted that would involve shifting our priorities, and in particular shifting them away from a system that was promoting mass incarceration and police response, putting forward more of an ecological and compassionate view of the kind of city that we wanted to live in. So about 2 years ago, in the context of a municipal election, we put that vision out there and have been working for 2 years on promoting it. And in particular, that meant going to the city council, trying to make these arguments. And one of the things that I encountered and other people encountered over the last few years promoting this was that while there were certain parts of that vision that people on the city council or involved in city staff were interested in, they really avoided the deeper questions that we were trying to put forward around the priorities of the city and around essentially like putting forward a more participatory vision about the kind of city that we wanted to build. And I came to see the city council itself actually as this kind of machine for preventing serious political discussion rather than as a space of political deliberation. And so I wanted to run, or my motivation for running was basically to try to take the city council a bit more seriously than it seemed to take itself, and to try to inject an honest and serious political discussion of the conflicts and ethical challenges of our time into the local city council.
Yeah. When you said they didn't want to talk about like the restructuring things that you were mentioning, were they like evasive, or did it seem that they were more complicit in that they wanted to keep this machine, as you called it, the way it is, or did it seem like they were just kind of a byproduct of an institution?
Well, to be very fair, right? There's 7 people on the city council, and the city council, is not actually a very powerful. Certainly, no individual within it is very powerful, which is good. But we also have this particular structure called a city manager government, or a council manager form of government. And so what that means is that the city council basically serves as like a board of directors, to approve or disapprove, or kind of uh, gently modify what the city staff and city manager have done all the research on and proposed as the course of action. And so as a result, basically, much of the work and much of the political assumptions that go into the decisions of the city council are actually kind of baked into what the city staff is doing. But the council doesn't really examine a lot of those things. They don't do their own research, and it kind of pushes all of the most important political questions onto these frank, technically what are called technocrats, people who are just kind of coming up with the instrumental way that the thing is going to be done, as opposed to asking the deeper political questions about how it should be done, whether it should be done, and what we're trying to do as people who live together.
Was this your first time like dealing with a I know this may not be a good word for that, but like some sort of political body, I guess, or oversight body? Did you think that
maybe the first time that I allowed myself to take one seriously?
Okay.
And like my own experience, maybe similar to yours or others, but is just that basically, like, institutions like this, bureaucratic institutions, government institutions, are just completely unresponsive to the needs of people and the things that I take seriously and the things that people that I care about.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a long history of that, rooted of course in, like, the role of the U.S. government as a colonial and racist force, and so I just generally haven't taken them very seriously. But basically, this idea for asking, well, what if there is a kind of possibility that exists at the level of the municipal government in a small town like this? What if we could really try to push an authentic conversation in these forums? And so what I found, to kind of get back to what you were more specifically asking before, is we met with, me and other people involved with the Carbondale Spring, met with a number of different council members, some of whom were very just listening to what we said, some of whom really engaged with and seemed interested in stuff. But overall, what we did not get was any sense that a bunch of active citizens of the town who were doing their own research and talking to their neighbors and trying to come up with the vision of what direction they wanted the town to go in, that we got the impression that was a very unwelcome fact. And in particular, when we were putting forward ideas that weren't already what they had in mind, So as soon as we start really questioning the priorities of policing and the assumptions really that are made about the police, then basically nobody wanted to talk about any of that.
Yeah, that seems to be a common theme, that when you question, and this is just all of America in general, that questioning that authority it just puts a lot of people off, especially people that have benefited from said authority, I've noticed. The institution does not like to change easily. So you went through the electoral process, and so did you meet a lot of journalists? Were there a lot of people wanting to cover this small election? No, really.
So there were three kind of public candidates forums that occurred, and of course, all of this happened online because of the ongoing pandemic. And but there were three forums, one of which was put on by a group called all by different community groups.
Okay.
The Neighborhood Alliance, the Southern Illinois Unity Coalition, and the League of Women Voters. Of those three different forums that were created, there was only one article written about any of them, and it was in the DE. But the other local papers, so that, and by which I'm counting the Carbondale Times and the Southern Illinoisan, and local, TV outlets, didn't cover them at all. And unfortunately, the DE article was written by somebody who I'm sure meant well, but did not actually seem to have a grasp of the kind of ongoing context of Carbondale politics. And so it was written in this way where it was like, this didn't really communicate what was at stake. It just kind of took quotes from people or something.
And just to clarify, in your own words, I guess, for your campaign, what was at stake?
Future and the future and soul of the town is at stake.
Okay.
Very, very, quite serious. We are like on the kind of cusp of really serious economic hardship as a town. To say nothing of the fact that just like the wider context that we are in is one of where the existential stakes of our life as a species are.
Oh, sorry, Zoom froze there.
And so and there's this ridiculous game that happens where we think that those are problems that are far away, and where we think that those kinds of things, the ecological problems that we face, the problem of mass incarceration, just to name, and the continuation of a racial caste system, the widespread economic problems and inequalities and all of the like health and negative health consequences and misery that creates, we kind of pretend that those big questions don't have a place in local politics and that someone's going to solve them some way. And I don't believe that any of us can afford to continue in that illusion. No. I think that if we're going to build a way out of those problems, we're going to build ways out at a local level. And so for me, like, everything is at stake in terms of the local. And so that's what I was trying to bring. But then also just at a more mundane and financial level, I really pointed to the fact that Carbondale's spending to maintain its double-sized police force has increased by 50% in the last 10 years. That's an increase of $4 million to maintain a police force that is double the size of the national average, and that those numbers are going to continue, and that maintaining the costs, maintaining the payments on the police pensions are set to is on track to basically require us to defund every other aspect of the city. And so I think that there's just a lot of serious challenges that I tried to draw our attention to.
Yeah, so back to like how I know you said you didn't get like any coverage other than that one article on your campaign. Do you think that is I mean, I'm assuming you're going to think it's a problem that we don't pay enough attention as a country. We're just so fixated on these really big national elections, but I've always felt that the real change, like you said, it's at a local level. These more status quo changing things. So how do you think that that we could change that and maybe give local elections like the one you ran in, where they might be asking more important questions? How do you think we can go about getting people to care about that in a more succinct way? Because I know not everybody cares about, like, a lot of people, you got to even convince climate change is real, which is sad, but it's a fact that we live in with people like that. So how do you think that we could go about talking about how to cover local elections?
let me say, because as I mentioned, there was very little coverage of this last election. I did actually send an email to reporters at other papers and asked them why. And basically the response I got back was essentially they were just pulled so thin with their resources. So the first thing, right, is to take a look at how a for-profit business model is essentially, is continuing to make a bunch of money for owners of these papers, but has basically drained reporting and journalism dry. So that's one thing you could think of is we actually need to rethink the business model of journalism today. That's one thing, and I know that a lot of people who know more about it have more concrete ideas about how to do that. Beyond that, though, there's also an assumption that kind of conditions contemporary journalism, this idea that it is supposed to be kind of like, or the way to cover an election is to either just present both sides of like, well, this person says this person says this, maybe at best to do some measure of fact checking. But I actually think that local media should aspire to more. Local papers are really in this position to be the carriers of the thread of the story, to be able to understand the meaning of what this or that political position is within its wider context. And I'll just give an example of this, an example of what could have happened. During the context of this campaign, there was this whole debate about police coming into a community center, the Irma C. Hayes Center on the northeast side. I was involved in this in opposition to the police being there. And as a part of my involvement as an activist and as an aspiring local politician, what I did is I went back through the Southern Illinoisan and I read every single article that the Southern Illinoisan had written on this topic of the Irma C. Hayes Center, going back, I went back about 15 years and I compiled them all into a document. And, you read that and you can see the contours of the whole narrative forming. It's almost like a book, because you can see, oh, here are the patterns. Here's when this idea of the police came in there in response to all of these things that happened. And I get the sense that the journalists that were writing about these things did not do that work. They walked into a situation, saw there was a conflict, very selectively chose the people that they were going to talk to about it. I have some real serious issues with the people that many of the local journalists have taken to be the spokespeople for the movement or something like that. But clearly didn't do the few days of reading that it would have taken in order to understand the historical situation that this conflict was a part of. And I think that everybody loses from that, because what we get is this kind of endless superficial dialogue that completely loses its connection to the history. Ultimately, I think it's the responsibility of local media to maintain that connection. What I'm saying makes sense to you?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, actually. Yeah, that local media for me, it started when all those, like, what are they called? Those they're like investment firms that buy up local newspapers and basically, like what you said, bleed them dry. And I think that is it also, it runs reporters. You have these news stations with like 2 to 3 staffed reporters trying to cover like an entire county almost. So of course it makes sense that you're going to get, the sparsity in stories and the quality in stories is not always going to be high. So yeah, I understand that, and I totally agree with you, and I think we do need to do more about the context sensitive is what I always like to talk about. Every story, everything that we're gonna have to look at is always gonna have some context to it that we're gonna have to like go back through, and They're not all going to be the same. History doesn't, I think you said it in the responses there. Yeah, history doesn't happen in or no, it was another article I was reading that you did. It was an interview where you said history isn't linear, it reverberates. And so, yeah, I really love that. I think, yeah, it was somewhere on the SIU philosophy page. But yeah, I was like, yeah, that's a really good way to put it, that these kind of things inspire each other. And then it also happens the same way with institutional racism and privatized prisons and all these other terrible things that we're going to have to start dealing with. I went off on a little tangent too. You got me going too. So this next question I'm really interested in. What are the similarities and differences that you maybe noticed between, and I know you said your campaign wasn't covered at all, but and maybe you can just talk about this a little, how you feel about the endless barrage of news coverage that happens when it's presidential election season. Your first sentence here, these things are apples and oranges and ought to be, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think. The last thing that I would want is for local elections to come to resemble what I think is really a lot of nauseating pageantry. And in some ways that has to be the case. I'm going to move closer to my
it's all good
Wi-Fi box here. In some ways, that has to be the case at the level of like federal government, because it's just like everything is so abstracted from our lives. You're just dealing with these like big principled questions that get filtered through propaganda and a lot of bullshit. But I think that the reason that I'm interested in municipal politics is because I think it holds a promise for a different kind of politics altogether. One that is deeper, slower, and more grounded in our actual experiences, and in our hopes for a place and the history of a place. So what I would like to see, is rather than what you're alluding to, federal politics getting all of this attention, or state politics getting all of this attention, and then local politics being ignored because it's just viewed as a smaller version of the same thing that's just less consequential. I'd like to see an understanding of, the different potential meaning of local politics, and to develop something that's less centered on personalities and sound bites and more focused on how we could actually live together and want to live together. But I think we need a dedicated local media outlet that is not involved in those same economic models that you describe, in order to help create a shift like that. And I don't think we have it.
No, definitely. When you were running your campaign, did you use like social media at all? Did you have like a Facebook page maybe for that kind of stuff?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, so I'm personally allergic to social media.
Makes you sneeze.
Yeah. But I did have a Facebook page that my good friend and campaign manager ran. And so I would write little things here and there, and she would post it. But I didn't really get so into that. What I did do, and I'm not sure if it counts as social media, but I used YouTube in a way that I felt like comfortable with, which was to basically do these like in-depth teach-in style talks where I would try to take specifically this question about the police and about how we can rethink our concept of public safety, to take that question more seriously than a soundbite would allow for, and to really make the space to go deep into the thought that I and other people like involved in a research collective have been working on. And the aim here was, based on the assumption that would be the real most difficult thing to swallow about my campaign. And instead of trying to reduce it all into a soundbite, I could say, look, if you're really interested in learning about this issue, listen to these. Here's my argument. Tell me where you think I went astray, And what I typically found is that most people that wanted to dismiss what I was saying, or try to fit it into some kind of buzzword that they thought they already understood, just weren't actually willing to take the time to listen to something that went into detail. And so that's itself part of the problem, right? Is just that, like, especially when we're talking about local elections, but really when we're talking about a lot of thinking, is that rarely are people willing to devote the kind of time that we think would be appropriate to, like, a haircut to learning about the police and its history, or thinking through these issues. But I think that has to change. I think we need to create a different political culture at a local level, and I think that that's really the only place we can create it too.
This utopian local election coverage in the media, do you think that maybe the future of that might be on social media, where it's like the Web 2.0, it's users posting content on the website? You have more control over that than, like, you would over your 5 o'clock news. So do you see that maybe social media, YouTube, any of that stuff is more the future than traditional like print journalism or something like that?
I think it is just, in fact, the present, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually part of the present that we need to overcome too, because we are also seeing the intense limitations of it, right?
Yes,
like,
yes.
If we were talking 15 years ago, we might be like, the future is, all this stuff. But this is actually the present for most people, and it's not actually, it's not necessarily any better. There are some good qualities about it, right? The generalization of the means of media production, right? Anybody can do it. That's awesome. However, if anybody can do it, that also means there's no cultures or traditions of standards, and there's a ton of deceptions, fallacies, just like fantastical conspiratorial thinking. I mean, right? And so a lot of people who earnestly and rightly are deeply critical of the mainstream media and its corporate agenda, which is true, but then get sucked into these alternative narratives that are actually funded by even worse or just as bad or alternate corporate agendas. But because it looks like it's created by somebody like them, or maybe is created by somebody like them, it feels like it's more authentic or true. And so we have to overcome both of those things. And then also, I think that there's just serious problems with social media in terms of, and when I say I have like an allergy to it, I mean that it does something to our bodies and our ability to relate with one another that I think is unhealthy. It makes it much easier to deny common courtesy or empathy toward others. It makes it easier to feel attached to winning an argument as distinct from searching for truth. It separates people from a feeling of calm presence in their bodies, right? All of these things are symptoms of the allergy of social media. And I think a lot of people actually have an undiagnosed allergy, and we need to get off of it more and spend more time talking to each other in person, where the consequences of your words can be felt on the body of another.
Yeah.
And this was one of the most interesting things about door knocking for me, is I just got to talk to lots of people who I really disagree with about a lot of things, but to be in their presence and to try to listen to each other, and if possible find common ground, or at least find the grounds of disagreeing like decent human beings. That's actually really great. It's a nice exercise when you live down the street from somebody.
So do you think that human to human connection part of it, the ability to look another person in the eye and share your ideas, social media obviously doesn't have that component, but do you think there are any other ways it can make up for it in terms of just the lacking of human empathy? Or do you think that just a screen separating people it's never going to compete with that and be able to loud car just drove by. It's never going to be able to compete with what you just described.
I think that it is possible that people could lose, and I think that, you know, some younger people who are basically like, whose whole world is built on screen mediated interactions, right? Just like haven't developed um the like haven't become accustomed to being in the presence of another person and feeling that intensity, which is what, you know, part of what it is to be a human being. I'm not like anti the internet or something, right? But I am saying that we can't forget about the importance of presence with others.
Yeah.
And we should actively work to create spaces where we, you know, where we are in the presence of others, and we can think together and feel what the meaning of our words feels like along with others. You know, that's a part of how reason moves, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
That it's not just words, you know. That's part of this really nasty Western philosophical tradition that separates out thought from our bodies. But it's a different experience to think collectively with other people in their presence, and that's an experience that we need to hold on to. But ultimately, what I'm for and what I think we can do is to stimulate an even more profound shift in the way that we think of as politics, and the principal form for that is to do assemblies, where we're not just looking for or listening to a couple people, but we are slowly, collectively developing the muscles for how to reflect on something among large groups, you know, of neighbors, and to listen to the voices and perspectives that are you know, either not spoken or just consistently not heard. And that's you know, there's a long tradition of assembly forms of governance or assemblies in the context of social movements that I think I would like to see explored more. And often those, sometimes they, you know, become voting assemblies, sometimes they work with forms of consensus, you know, but it's more about like creating a space where there can be a deep dialogue about the issue that is including everybody that has a stake in it, rather than just pitting, you know, pitting people into competition around elections or something like that.
But yeah, thank you so much, Nick, for stopping by. It was a really good time. I learned a lot. And are there any like links? I know you said you're allergic to social media, but anywhere if people want to find you and follow you, hear what you have to say, anything like that you have?
People can follow. Well, actually, I have a YouTube channel, Nick Smaligo, whatever, on YouTube, and then also the Carbondale Spring has a bunch of different media stuff that I don't directly run, but I'm involved with the conversations around a lot of that. So there's a Carbondale Spring Care Worker Instagram. There's a Facebook page for the Carbondale Spring and the Food Autonomy Project and stuff like that.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much for stopping by. It was a great time. Good chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Well, you have a good one, man. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for sticking around, and subscribe if you like this kind of content. I'll be releasing another episode on the first week of May, but until then, be nice, take care, everyone.